You can make a pretty good argument that the thing that differentiates success and failure in elite sport, at least, is mental preparation and sports psychology. So let's start to think about some factors that might relate to mental preparation. Well, the first one, it's a super simple thing to say, but it's the idea of positive thinking. And I don't think this in any way will surprise you that if we tend to think about things in a positive frame, those things tend to happen more frequently in a positive outcome. So what would we specifically mean for our footballer, for our sprinter, for our gymnast? Well, we would anticipate that a good sports person would engage in what we call self-talk. This is a repeated and positive message that one can make to oneself. We could describe it as a mantra. Okay, a mantra, which is, you can imagine repeating over and over in your mind things such as, I've worked hard to be here, I deserve this, I'm ready. This kind of mantra-based thinking would be quite impacting. I want to mention the word repeated to you because I think that's really important. It's not about just thinking it once, but in a repeated positive frame. And we can also say that positive thinking helps to block. And you might want to think about what we mean. What is it that we're looking to block? What do we mean? What are we blocking? And we're blocking negativity. One of the features of the sporting mind and the mind in general I'd encourage you to think about is that people will behave because they're moving towards something like success or achievement, or they'll behave because they're trying to avoid something like defeat, loss, pain. Now, what we're trying to do with positive thinking is focus on the thoughts of I want to achieve rather than I want to avoid. And that's an interesting mentality just to briefly mention and reflect on. Secondly, we want to think about imagery. Okay, imagery. What do we mean by this? Well, we are talking about picturing in one's mind, again, positive images. Positive. They can often be sport-based. Okay, so for example, it could be that this gymnast here, he or she, well, it's a high bar, so I'm going to say he pictures himself undertaking this performance repeatedly over and over again with a positive, correct technical outcome, with a great landing and all of those sorts of things. Or this performer over here pictures down the 100-meter running track what their technique's going to look like shortly before they participate. But I also want to say to you, it doesn't have to be sport-based. Imagery can also be relaxation-based, such as remembering moments of relaxation, such as putting one's mind into a place that one enjoys being in, for example. Now, I always feel a bit cliche when I write this down, but we could describe it as that notion of the happy place, that sort of notion that you go to that relaxation space in your mind and enjoy being there. It switches off that worry, that anxiety, that apprehension that might come from sort of moments or days or even weeks before big competition. Let's keep going. I want to introduce to you mental rehearsal. Now, I'll keep it on this side because mental rehearsal will feel a lot like imagery, but I want to be really specific about mental rehearsal, okay? Mental rehearsal is a form of imagery, but, and this is the important part of this, but it is performance-based, okay? It is performance-based. So, a couple of things that are worth noting on here. So this is not the happy place type notion, all right? This is not thinking about oneself on a beach, feet in the water, fish nibbling on your dead skin, whatever it happens to be, but what we're thinking about here is that the performance-based aspect of visualization. Now, I'm going to stress to you that mental rehearsal can be both visual and kinesthetic. Now, let me just express what I mean by that, okay? Let me come back to my gymnast for a second, who's sort of mid-rotation here. He could be, before his performance, he could be both picturing his performance, but also kind of having like this micro-muscular contractile experiences, the muscles that are going to be working and holding the balance, the core is going to be tightening, and so on and so on. It's kinesthetic and visual in its notion. I want to say again, it's good to promote calmness. It promotes calmness, and I want to be specific about when this might promote calmness. when we are under pressure. So when that moment comes on where we've got to face the last ball of the innings, or we've got to score the penalty that decides the game, or we've got to get that first serve in no matter what, or we've got to hold that balance or our performance is going to suffer, or we've got to produce the perfect line in a dance. Under pressure, mental rehearsal will help us to get the right outcome more often. And finally, guys, is the notion of selective attention. Now, some of you, in fact, I was going to say some of you will be studying at some point the notion of information processing. Okay, now selective attention is part of how we interpret information from our display, our environment. Now, selective attention is where we filter things in, but perhaps most importantly, we filter out certain things. Okay, and I want to introduce a nice term for you to use. In our selective attention, we ignore, let me just change that because I've put relevant rather than irrelevant. We ignore, I almost got that exactly the wrong way around, irrelevant. We ignore, that's an E there, believe it or not, we ignore irrelevant cues. Okay, so information from our environment that's not relevant, we ignore it. And what do? We focus on relevant cues. That's what selective attention does to us. We effectively filter out everything that doesn't matter. Think about our sprinter. He or she could filter out completely all of the participants in the race because it's irrelevant for that performance, and they could focus entirely on that sort of power output and correct high knee lift, high ankle flick, and so on to get that correct technique. And it's a real nice one for you to think about. And let me just put a little point here on this. It improves, just to link to another lesson, improves information processing. Okay, so in other words, we become faster at processing information. That would help things like our reaction time. For example, we process information faster because we're only focusing on that which is relevant and ignoring that which is irrelevant. Thanks.